Wait for, yeah, come on, come on up, since we're changing the order around a little bit. You guys all set? Thanks, everybody, for coming on relatively short notice. Secretary Galley, come on up. We're here to answer any questions, give you an update. I know PG&E will be providing an update, I believe, at 6 o'clock tonight as well. We just got off the phone with Bill Johnson, the current CEO of PG&E, and I have been up and down this state. I was in Oakland 2 days ago. I had a chance to go down to San Diego. I was in LA today in Merced, Turlock, now here with you, assessing not only the situation here in Northern California, but assessing what invariably will be conditions that will take shape in the next 48 hours in Southern California. Southern California is not immune to the kind of conversations most of us here in the northern part of the state have experienced. Let me just make something crystal clear from the top. This is amplifying some of my earlier comments in Oakland and in San Diego and Los Angeles. It's decisions that were not made that have led to this moment in PG&E's history and the state of California as it relates to our major investor-owned utility. It is not conditions. This is not, from my perspective, a climate change story as much as a story about greed and mismanagement over the course of decades. Neglect, a desire to advance not public safety but profits. Over the course of years and years and years, the kind of hardening of the grid was not done. Those were decisions that were made by Pacific Gas and Electric. They chose not to modernize their grid over the course of many, many years. It led to their own demise. It led to bankruptcy. It led to a series of events that culminated literally weeks before I had the privilege of being sworn in as governor of the state of California. You may recall I took not the oath of office, but I took over as acting governor of the state of California the day after my election as lieutenant governor in that position when Governor Brown was out of office, when we were receiving word about a fire in Northern California, later commonly referred to as the Camp Fire. Learned more hours later about a fire in Southern California, the Woolsey Fire. It led to a sense of deep urgency. This now the second year, last year and the year prior, record number of devastating forest fires, brush fires, fires that, as we know, but did not know at the time, were directly caused by neglect and decisions by major investor-owned utilities. Camp Fire, substantively, that example. We, as a consequence of that, led an effort that culminated here with an hour-long presentation, a detailed presentation of how we were laying out and scoping not just the problem, but framing a strategy of solutions. We laid out a framework on environmental commitments we were making. We put together a wildfire mitigation strategy. We talked in terms of how we can get our largest investor-owned utility out of bankruptcy and do it with a sense of urgency. And I made it clear to the legislature we couldn't wait till after the summer. We needed to get it done. I don't think, without exception, there's a person in this room that did not write or produce a TV episode that said that was likely not going to happen. We got it done. And we got it done because we recognize the moment we are in. No one is naive about this moment. In every way, shape, or form, we want to do everything in our power to shape this moment in a much more enlightened way. What has occurred in the last 48 hours is unacceptable. What has occurred in the last 48 hours is kids staying home from school. You know, parents that can't bathe their kids, folks that come home from work, can't even find a way to get into their garage. You've got people that can't even access water or medical supplies. We're seeing a scale and scope of something that no state in the 21st century should experience. What's happened is unacceptable, and it's happened because of neglect. It's happened because of decisions that were deferred, delayed, or not made by the largest investor-owned utility in the state of California and one of the largest in the nation. So we are doing everything in our power to get through this moment. And so I want to talk briefly about that. We, as you know, and you'll learn more from PG&E later this evening, we are now moving from turning off the lights to turning on the lights. PG&E is now in that mode of assessment. They are now looking to turn back the lights, but it requires them to inspect thousands of miles of line before they do that. We are supplementing those efforts and providing resources, as we have been, to PG&E to provide support. If they need aerial equipment, we will provide that equipment so that we can move forward with those investigations in a much more expedited timeline. We're providing any personnel that they may need, including call center personnel, if that's needed. It seems pretty evident it is. I think it was 1 a.m. this morning. The teams at Esri, Microsoft, and Amazon with our IT teams help PG&E get their website back up. That's not the state's responsibility, but we will take responsibility because of this moment. It requires that. We are doing everything in our power to build capacity and partnerships. That's why the three folks behind me are behind me. They will amplify the work they have been doing from day one. And day one for us was this weekend, arguably the end of last week, this weekend, and more formally, the last 48 hours. And over the course of the next few days, we will be pushing very hard to make sure that PG&E fulfills all of their commitments they're making privately and all the commitments they're making publicly to turn the lights back on as quickly as possible. And in turn, we will, in a parallel track, continue to hold them accountable to fulfill the obligations they have under the legislation we passed. And you can go back, and I encourage you to go back and look at the specific obligations PG&E has in terms of modernizing their equipment, investing $5 billion, the investor-owned utilities, all three in the state, to do just that, to make sure that PUC investigates and monitors not only what's occurred over the course of the last 48 hours, but the protocols that were in place, the memorandums of understanding, and advances with the kind of, I think, scrutiny that's required of this moment, a deeper understanding of where we're about to go, not just in course of the next couple days as we turn the lights back on, but to make sure that we're not having to make a false choice, and that is between public safety and hardship. This is respectfully, or rather, this can't be respectfully, the new normal. And it is a false choice to say it's hardship or safety. And this idea that, we're never going to experience 20% humidity or lower or 25-mile-an-hour winds with 45-mile-an-hour gusts ever again is absurd. Of course we will. And that then suggests, are we going to be right back where we are today? And that suggests things have to radically change. And we have a plan, we had a timeline to get them out of bankruptcy by July or June, end of June next year. But in the interim, we need to see significant improvements in terms of their operation, particularly as it relates to anything along the lines of these PSPS, these power shutoffs. One final point. We also anticipated, and we stated this on multiple occasions, including here in this room, that this idea of de-energization is not novel. It occurs as an industry best practice. San Diego's been doing it for years and years and years. They learned their lesson in 2007. PG&E didn't learn that lesson. even after some of the mismanagement of San Bruno. But San Diego Gas and Electric is arguably one of the nation's most effective and efficient IOUs, but specifically as it relates to their predictive analysis, their weather station. I had a chance to visit it a few months ago. It's exceptional. It's at another level. And they made the point, this is an important tool when there's a confluence of conditions. Knowing that and anticipating that PG&E would finally get that message, because they had that choice before camp. You had 60 to 65 mile-an-hour winds the night before that campfire. They chose not to de-energize. That was a decision they made. You had 20 to 30 mile-an-hour consistent winds up there on the day of that fire, and gusts that went to as much, I think, as 52 miles per hour. And that decision cost lives and unprecedented damage, and ultimately their bankruptcy. But in anticipation of de-energization, we put $75 million in the budget approved by the legislature to make sure that we can fill gaps and build bridges and partnerships with local community leaders. And that money is being distributed, or will be when reimbursements are requested. And I just want to acknowledge the legislature for their support of that effort, and the importance of those dollars being made available, I think underscores that sense of urgency that all of us have felt around trying to meet this moment. One final point, let me caveat, last point. Again, I want to just compliment CAL FIRE for their incredible work. There's been 270 fires, not just CAL FIRE, but other local firefighting agencies. 270 fires in the last 24 hours. The Moraga fire was benefited from pre-positioning of assets, something else that we did through our budget. And I want to just congratulate the experts behind me for recommending those pre-positioned assets. We also have been the beneficiary, and we could talk more about that, of some of the early emergency declarations we made on vegetation management and forest management. Riverside was a beneficiary of some pre-positioning recently. It's a way of saying this: we're trying to put all the tools in the toolkit to get ahead of this, and we've, up to this point, have been able to stave off some of the worst as it relates to wildfires. But we're not out of the woods. And remember, what happened at Woolsey and Camp happened in November. And we are in the beginning days of October. So we are not out of this by any stretch. I know we're talking about blackouts right now, but we're also talking about public safety more broadly, and mitigation and strategies of suppression. So that's broad strokes where we are. But I want to make this point, because we are here literally because we were invited to our SOC, as we refer to it, which we put together a number of days ago in anticipation of this event, by our Office Emergency Service Director, Mark Garducci, who's going to also give you an update on where we are. And then I'll turn it over to our representatives from both CAL FIRE and our health czar. Does that work? No. He runs all the health agencies in the state, Mark Galley, afterwards.
Great. Thank you, Governor. Mark Gallarducci, Director of the Governor's Office of Emergency Services. You're here at the State Operations Center. This center was activated by the Governor early Tuesday morning, where we have been bringing in all the various state agencies to help coordinate assets in support of the public safety power shutoffs that PG&E instituted late Monday afternoon, early Tuesday. And now, as it's moving towards the south, Southern California Edison, and possibly San Diego Gas and Electric. We know that the state is been under a number of red flag warnings and other wind advisories. You'll hear a little bit more about that in a second from Chief Tyler from CAL FIRE. As we are here today, there are a number of fires that are burning, and there have been structures that have been lost. So we are definitely in a window where fire activity is taking place. And this center is working actively to not only support local government in managing the consequences of the public safety power shutoff, but as well supporting resource deployment through the mutual aid system in support of local government and also CAL FIRE as necessary. Governor mentioned pre-deployment of assets. We were able to move a number of fire strike teams strategically in place over the course of the last couple of days throughout the area where the public safety power shutoffs were instituted, and that has proven to be very effective with regards to making sure that we were right on any new fire starts, and it's been very effective. As well, we've been deploying air assets through the National Guard and other assets in support of CAL FIRE's fire mission. There's still roughly now, as the governor mentioned, the utilities are moving towards, at least PG&E is moving towards inspection of their system for anticipated restoration. There's still roughly about 540,000 customers that are out of power, and we're working closely and engaging with PG&E closely to help to accelerate that process wherever we can, and of course provide everything from security forces on the ground to technical advice across the board. There are a number of cascading issues that have arisen as a result of these power shutoffs, and it's been a concerted effort by local government, by state agencies, and by our private sector partners to be able to bring assets to the table. So we will continue to do that in this center until all the power is restored, and then we'll get back to a steady state. So with that, let me turn it over to Chief Joe Tyler from CAL FIRE for a quick fire update.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. My name is Joe Tyler. I'm the Chief of Fire Protection for CAL FIRE. As Governor Newsom brought that even further, 476 fires have occurred across the state of California that CAL FIRE has responded to. Of those, there were 46 new fires that occurred, and they were contained at 110 acres. That goes to show that the resources from the local, state, and federal levels being pre-positioned, and those that are standing ready in their fire stations are capable of containing these fires rapidly. Now, we do have fires burning across the state of California as the winds diminish in Northern California and pick up through the rest of the week and into the weekend in Southern California. We do have a few fires burning in the area. One in Amador County, located in the Caples Lake area on the El Dorado National Forest. We're assisting them. One in Mariposa County along Highway 140 going towards El Portal and Yosemite outside of Mariposa. A couple of the newest fires, Retchie Fire in Moreno Valley, last update on that was 150 acres burning rapidly there. And one of the largest fires down in Southern California right now in the Calamasa area along Interstate 10, over 500 acres currently with resources that were pre-positioned as well as local resources that are actively fighting that fire. We continue to monitor and pre-position more resources behind these that are actively fighting the fires as these winds continue through the weekend, and we will continue to monitor the weather as it continues through the week. With that, I will turn it over to Secretary Galley.
Thank you, Chief. Mark Galley, Secretary of Health and Human Services. So for the past few days, Health and Human Services has been working closely with local entities, both private, public, state facilities, to ensure generator power in all water and electricity needs of people in residential facilities, including hospitals, state hospitals, developmental centers, nursing homes across the affected areas have any needs met. And at the moment, we're tracking no unmet needs. We know that there's a number of people who are without power today who have critical health needs, either the need for durable medical equipment to be plugged in and operational, day in and day out, overnight often as well. We've been working with local entities to identify who those people are, who the most vulnerable people are, and to make sure that they have power and adequate supply of services. Additionally, those with medications that need refrigeration, being able to identify solutions for those folks to make sure that they have often life-saving medications available to them. We will continue to play this role over the days to come as we transition from Northern California focus to Southern California as well. I would just urge people, especially seniors, people with disabilities, and people with medical needs, that if you have unmet medical needs, to call 911, to rely on your local entities to help you solve those problems. We will be continuing to work closely with them to make sure any unmet needs are met as quickly as possible, and that other surrounding counties are able to support. As far as durable medical equipment goes, if you are in a state where you have to evacuate or leave your home, please remember to bring that equipment with you. Bring essential medications, know your medications, so that there's no gaps in your care, and that we can help address your needs as swiftly and quickly as possible. With that, I'll end.
Thank you, Secretary. So happy to answer any questions you guys may have. I'm sorry.
Governor, there's been an estimate put out by the Stanford Woods Institute for the environment that this whole process has had about $2 billion worth of economic impact. You talked about $75 million that it could be available for people to get reimbursement, municipalities to get reimbursement. Does the state have an estimate?
Not yet. No, it's all in real time. It's all what will be determinative is how quickly they turn back on the power. If that's not done in the next couple of days, then it will be. I mean, we'll have to ratchet up those calculations. But those are respectfully, I think, back of the envelope estimates. I've seen, by the way, other estimates that deviate by hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars from that. But we'll put all that together. Look, we're not talking about business interruption, but we are talking about folks that have had business interruption to make sure they have detailed receipts on that so that they can pursue reimbursements. But what I'm talking about with the $75 million was more just sharing assets as it relates to pre-positioning equipment, generators, other types of support for local government. That was money, that was more discretionary money, wasn't money to address the larger economic consequences of a circumstance like this.
Governor, you asked, are we going to be right back where we are today? What's your answer to the question you just asked?
Well, if we make the same decisions we've made that created this problem. The good news is a lot of things are underway that give me confidence about the future, but we've got to get through this immediate moment. Again, this is, I'm as frustrated as anybody. I just got here a number of months ago. I'm taking full responsibility of getting us out of this. But they're at $5 billion that is committed by all of the IOUs as part of their mitigation plan. That's going to take some time for those dollars to see a real return, to see the kinds of technological improvements, to continue the work on vegetation management, forest management. We're way behind, as you know, PG&E in that respect. They've been admonished by the bankruptcy judge on multiple occasions. Continue to hold them account to all of the things they've committed to, get them out of the bankruptcy process so that they can recapitalize and have more additional resources to make the kind of investments to upgrade and modernize their grid and harden their grid. So all of that cannot be done overnight, but all of that is in the process, and we didn't wait for this moment to then initiate that process. We are in the middle of that process. Now we have to accelerate it and hold PG&E's feet, forgive me, to the fire.
Governor, you've been talking today about de-energizing the power lines. In view of how PG&E has handled this entire crisis over the past 48 hours, do you think that they are living up to the standards of a best industry practice?
Not yet, no. No. If you can't keep a website on, the answer is no. If people are on hold for even more than 10 minutes, let alone an hour plus, call center, the answer is no. Absolutely not.
What needs to be done then to improve that?
Every single thing that we laid out in our report, every single thing we laid out in the legislation, go back to 1054 and look at all the things they're required now to do. Look at that legislation in terms of timelines. Look at the prescriptive things we've laid out that they'll be held to account to ultimately get to where they need to go.
Governor, if tonight. How are you going to judge whether this was the right call to have these massive shutdowns, or if it was overkill? And what kind of measures?
Good question.
Matrices will you look at?
We've already directed the PUC to begin that process to look objectively, to look at the protocols and procedures that were in place, look at the MOUs that we have, the memorandums of understanding, look at the assertions that have been made and contextualize those assertions and factualize them, making sure that we have real data to bear them out. What they do in the next 3 days will be profoundly determinative in terms of that assessment, how quickly they get the power back on, and making sure they meet all the timelines and that have been memorialized in legislation. All of that are factors, but PUC has been directed to do just that in real time and to assess that and make recommendations.
If I might follow up related, this seems to have shown some gaps, almost as a drill for a major statewide emergency, an earthquake, for instance. What are you seeing there as far as, universities having shut down for lack of generators, the tunnel, the Caltrans didn't know that they needed generators for that. Some gaps there. What are you seeing? What do you want to do about it?
Look, when this team's in control behind us and not a private corporation, that I have a different level of confidence. I mean, look at the way these guys handle themselves with these major wildfires of the last few years. I'll put Cal Fire and their work up against any in the industry across the country. I'll put up Mark Iriducci's work at OES up against any in the country. That's when we're driving the ship, not a private corporation. And so that's that. If there's any lesson learned in that respect, it's looking at how we can position ourselves vis-a-vis the law and other mechanisms to assert ourselves at a different scale and drive a corporate governance structure to do things in a different and more enlightened way. But I have all the confidence in the world. And by the way, I've been focused on the issue of seismic concerns for 20 years as a former county supervisor in San Francisco, as someone that governed that city as mayor for 2 terms, someone who's been an advocate for earthquake retrofits and the like, and someone very pleased with the progress we're making on earthquake early warning and the like, that we're prepared, much as a state can be, and the response even in Ridgecrest, which I was satisfied with as governor, which was not insignificant. But PG&E in bankruptcy is a whole together different beast, and we have to address that in the immediate term, but I'm confident more broadly about our emergency capacity in the state.
You were just talking about who is like in the driver's seat, like a private corporation versus the government, of course. Should these power shutoffs then be the sole purview of the state government?
Well, then you own it, and you own the decision not to do something. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting question. It's one we've asked ourselves on multiple occasions. The decisions made in San Diego are decisions not made by this city council or mayor in San Diego. They're made by the experts, and there are protocols and procedures that are best practices, as I said, not only in the state, but are modeled for the rest of the country. PG&E is now finally getting into that business, and we've seen a scale and scope because of the scale and scope of the size of PG&E. It's 47 counties. 48? I mean, basically up there, almost 50 counties. These guys are operating versus 1 in San Diego. You're up the Oregon border down to Kern County, Santa Barbara. I mean, it's a service area that begs the question, is this the best governance structure? And by the way, I've offered points of view on that on many occasions at this mic and this podium, including offering points of view about what cities like San Francisco are offering and points of view about reconsidering that entire governance structure, which we should be open to all of the above. And I want to see competition. I don't want to see one group over the other being prioritized as it relates to the restructuring of PG&E. And we want all competitors to get in and talk about potential major reorganization of this entity so that we don't have this problem in the future.
Governor, just a couple more questions for you guys. Yeah, just a quick follow-up question. Just in terms of PG&E's size, as you said, because it is so big in terms of its service territory and, just in terms of all of its assets, does that mean that, their size is too big in terms of physically having to take care of everything? Like, are they like not as nimble perhaps as a smaller provider? That's,
I don't think any objective observer could suggest otherwise. So I think that's all being assessed in real time, and you can go back to our report. You'll see a series of options we put in writing that laid out questions and our desire to explore answers to that fundamental question. And that's exactly, I can assure you, what Judge Alsop's doing. That's what their current board of directors is doing, their new CEO is doing. They're assessing that, and I think that's only underscored by what's happened in the last 48 hours.
Governor, yesterday you seemed a little bit more understanding of the shutoffs. You said that everybody's prepared, the winds are coming down, and the next few days would determine how we get out of this. You said this is the new normal. Today you're saying this isn't the new normal, and you seem pretty frustrated. And so I'm trying to understand, what's the change of heart in the last 24 hours?
You're taking two statements and not necessarily contextualizing all of the statements that were made. Exactly. But in the context of the broader narrative, which is looking at industry best practices as it relates to the issue of de-energizing, which is not just a new normal, but is protocol in Southern California, has been the case for over a decade. And to the extent that specific protocol is now being established with PG&E in this service territory, that is one of the tools in the toolkit that will be, I think, advanced, but needs to be in a more strategic and surgical sense. What they did was broad strokes. Counties that weren't necessarily impacted or could have been didn't need to be included in that de-energization were, and that cannot be a new normal.
So Governor, the entire narrative that you gave us at the beginning of this of PG&E having decades of mismanagement, neglect, all driven by greed, I asked a PG&E rep about this very thing today. You know, it's all your equipment being unable to stand up to these conditions. This led to this.
Correct.
And so why wouldn't you compensate people for, say, losing a fridge full of food? And they called that backward looking and said it's all about the climate. So they're telling the exact opposite story of what you are. I guess I'm wondering, you know, do you feel like PG&E is taking its role in all of this seriously, and what would you say?
Well, they better. I mean, look, as you know, part of our reforms includes time compensation to public safety. That was something that came out of our legislative package, which is, I think, profoundly important, meaning incentivize for good behavior, not incentivize for bad behavior. As it relates to compensating people that have been impacted, I believe they should be compensated, and we will pursue that. They have not made a determination, to my knowledge. They made that to you. They said something differently to us. So that's to be determined. But I believe that people should be, and that's why I think they should be very copious in terms of their note-taking to make a determination of their impacts because of the size and scope and the time associated with this. So none of that is satisfying, what you just said, based upon your specific conversation, and you know, is not inconsistent with past practices. And we are encouraging a better path forward, and we're trying to incentivize it through compensation packages as well.
I think a lot of their customers think PG&E carries itself around as though they're untouchable. And
Well, they're not untouchable, quite the contrary. They're in bankruptcy. They're in peril of not existing. So quite the contrary. I think the evidence overwhelming that that's not the case. And to the extent that there's a new management team, there's a new management team. There's new leadership. I think I've worked with at least 4 CEOs in the course of my few days. I don't know who PG&E is. It's an entity. It's a corpus. But the individuals, they seem to come and go. And so that's what we're all struggling with. And that's the opportunity, perversely, of a bankruptcy process and procedure, is to make sure that we address all of these ills from the past and make sure we do not replicate them moving forward. And so, look, the sentiment that you're expressing is one I share.
We're going to take a live seat and then we're going to wrap up. In terms of, again, this point you made about this cannot be the new normal, you know, what are you doing or what can you do to ensure that this level of disruption doesn't happen again, aside from waiting for PG&E?
I'd encourage you to review everything that was just stated.
But you're talking about things that are going to take time, you know, for PG&E to right itself.
Alexi, I with all due respect, it's there's no magic wand here. We didn't wait for this moment. there wasn't a day that I was in office, when I took that oath of office, that we delayed initiating with resolve and an aggressive posture to try to meet this crisis head on. And you see the architecture of everything we laid out. Those are all proof points. Look at the budget, $1 billion related to emergency management, response, suppression, vegetation management, pre-positioning, new physical assets, and the like. So all of that is what we've been able to accomplish. But again, to harden and upgrade 100,000 miles of line, come on, it's not going to happen in a week or two, and in even a month or two or a year or two. But it needs to happen, and we have now specific framework to actually accomplish that. That did not exist a number of months ago.
Governor,
So to the people, so to the people that are sitting in the dark, that my colleagues in the Bay Area are talking to, you know, the message is wait, hold on.
No, the message is, well, I don't mean to be argumentative, but respectfully, I would encourage you to consider everything that's been said today. That's the message. That's why we stated what we stated. It's why we began the conversation by laying out specifically what we expect, what we're currently doing, what we expect, and all the work that's been done. And as I'll remind you, what I said, young man behind you, there's specific milestones. There's specific dollar figures attached to those milestones. There's new compensation strategies. There's a bankruptcy judge. All of these things contextualize this moment. And all these new technologies, they're investing these sectoral technologies to become more precise. And you could talk to PG&E about that tonight, talk about some of the new technologies they're putting in, which will aid in this effort so you don't have to de-energize large parts of the grid, but you can micro-target parts of the grid. Those are investments that are being made in real time. They can't happen soon enough, but one should be assured that they're all part and parcel of the broader reforms that we've been advanced and the reforms that have been underway at PG&E. Not just this year, but some of that was actually happening slowly, albeit slowly, but was happening last year.
Governor, there's 480,554 customers right now just on that board without power. Putting aside, like, who's at fault and just...
They should be outraged. They should be outraged.
What's your message to those people?
It's the message I said in the first place. I mean, these are parents that can't bathe their kids. These are folks that are, you know, spending $4.20 on gasoline to turn their car on to charge their phone. I mean, this is unacceptable. I've said it on multiple occasions. I'll repeat it. And we're gonna drive these reforms hard. We're gonna get through the next few days. We're gonna hold them accountable to everything they're promising privately, everything they're promoting publicly, and every damn thing that we laid out in our legislative package. Every specific legal requirement, we're gonna hold them to account to make sure they accomplish the things that they're now legally required to do based upon our resolve to get this utility into the 21st century, so something like this doesn't have to happen again. But to the extent that it is part of a tool in a toolkit, an industry best practice, that is something that should not be taken off the table. Because I'll tell you, if they had de-energized this time last year or a year ago in camp, a lot of people would be alive. A lot of people's lives were lost because they chose not to do the right thing, not to do what San Diego Gas and Electric had done. But they have to do it with precision, and they have to do it in a way that meets this moment. And this current operation is unacceptable. The current conditions and circumstances are unacceptable. We get that, and they need to get their act together and get things done that they have committed to.
All right, that's it, everyone. We're gonna keep the rest of these folks here for interviews after. Get the governor.